Napoleon Vs Tripods. How would the War of the Worlds have gone in this scenario? Would France have been crushed by the fighting machines, or would the greatest military general in history manage to use his strategic mind and unique battle tactics to become victorious against this extraterrestrial threat? I've spent time using the intelligences of multiple AI chatbots to try to work out realistically what might have happened in this event, while adding my own embellishments to compile it together into a cohesive video. In the original Victorian story, the British Empire was utterly defeated by invaders from Mars. But let's instead set it nearly a century earlier in the midst of the Napoleonic Wars. The year is 1805, and France is currently engaged in the War of the Third Coalition against primarily the UK, Austria and Russia. At Tuileries Palace in Paris, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte is in his headquarters planning his next campaign when his attention is suddenly drawn to a bright streak in the sky, a sight so unusual and striking that it halted all activity in the bustling command centre. As the streak disappeared into the horizon, focus was about to return to the battle maps, when immediately the ground shook and a plume of smoke rose from that sight into the sky. Everyone present was stunned, as initial assumptions suggested it might be a new kind of weapon, a cannon perhaps capable of launching projectiles over great distances. If this was true, then Paris was in great danger. Concerned by such a prospect, Napoleon swiftly ordered his best men to investigate the site of the explosion, the rural area of Barbizon, nearly 40 miles from Paris, where the local populace, already on edge due to the ongoing war, was thrown into a panic. Napoleon waits patiently, contemplating for half a day, before he's shocked to be informed that nearly all the men he sent have been annihilated. The details are murky and unbelievable, scrapped together from the stories of stragglers that survived the encounter, describing a capsule embedded into the area from which creatures emerged, utilizing a great iron arm holding a cannon that shot a devastating light from its funnel. He had to see it for himself, and consequently prepared cavalry units to swiftly ride to Barbizon. When they got there, the Emperor, cautious of what he had heard, split the cavalry into smaller units, ordering 2 to go around in a big curve, seeking some point of vantage, while 1 remained at the front, waving the French flag, heading slowly towards the cylinder, attempting to goad some kind of activity from this now still giant object that lay before them. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the French countryside as the horses, sensing the unease of their riders, snorted and shifted restlessly. Napoleon, atop his steed on a hill behind the half-buried cylinder, surveyed the scene with a steely gaze that was shattered at the next sequence of events. There was a grinding noise emanating that was contrasted by the silence of the stunned soldiers, watching on as a monstrous 3-legged machine emerged, towering over the landscape. Its body gleamed in the fading sunlight, an alien apparition against the familiar backdrop of the French countryside. It moved with a grace that belied its size, each step causing the earth to tremble. From its apex, a mechanical arm extended, ending in a mirror-like disc. There was a flash of light, brighter than the sun, followed by a wave of intense heat. Napoleon, ever the tactician, quickly regained his composure. "Form up," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The cavalry formed a line, their sabres glinting in the eerie light cast by the machine. As they charged towards the alien invader, a battle cry rose from their throats, a defiant challenge to this otherworldly foe. The tripod turned to face them, the disc on its arm beginning to glow ominously. This was a battle unlike any they had fought before, and yet, in the face of this unprecedented threat, Napoleon's forces charged on, their determination unwavering. The frontal cavalry unit, once a formidable force, was decimated within moments, the tripod's heat cannon sweeping across the battlefield, scorching the earth in an engulfment of fire. Napoleon, witnessing the unimaginable power of this adversary, quickly realised the need for a tactical retreat. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice echoing across the battlefield. The remaining soldiers, their faces pale but resolute, followed their emperor away from the carnage. As they retreated, another meteor streaked across the sky, a chilling reminder of the threat they now faced. Upon reaching Paris, Napoleon was met with a city on edge. News of the initial attack had spread, and fear hung heavy in the air. As he made his way to the Tuileries Palace, he couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in his heart. In the midst of this crisis, he received a message from Alexis Bouvard, the renowned astronomer. Bouvard had been observing the meteorites, and upon hearing of these subsequent events, he had come to a startling conclusion. There had been explosions on Mars, mirroring the appearance of these celestial objects, which now, it could be presumed, is from which these cylinders had been launched as a form of ship. Napoleon took a moment to process this information. Warriors from Mars was almost too much to comprehend. Just after this, he received word that more tripods had now been spotted, heading towards their direction. These Marsians were coming, and Paris was in their path. He knew that time was needed to prepare any effective attack against these monsters. That was the long-term goal. Short-term, however, he knew that every man, woman and child in this city was in grave danger. An order was given out to evacuate all of Paris, but to do so would take far too long. Napoleon stood over a large table, strewn with maps and reports, his brow furrowed in deep thought as he traced the path of the advancing tripods with his finger. "We need to buy time," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Paris must be evacuated before these Marsians reach us." His advisors nodded, their faces pale but determined. "What do you propose, sire?" one of them asked. "We lure their units that are closest to the city away from Paris," Napoleon continued, his finger now tracing a path towards the French Alps. "Our artillery will engage them from afar, drawing their attention. They will think we are preparing for a last stand. But instead, we will wage a continually extending campaign. We retreat until other artillery units emerge, firing at them and then likewise retreating, luring them further while the first unit repositions to later do the same. We do this continually until we lead them into the heart of the Alps, where the rough terrain will slow their gigantic forms down and we can slip between the cracks to gain more advantageous and protected positions." And so, as the city prepared for evacuation, Napoleon and his soldiers rode out to face the Marsian threat, employing hit-and-run tactics with their superior knowledge of the terrain. And perhaps, in the icy grip of the Alps, they would find a way to turn the tide against these invaders. During this time, the other nations of Europe began to become aware of what was happening, disbelieving at first. Napoleon, recognizing the Martian threat, would potentially have reached out to the major powers of Europe, perhaps even including the United Kingdom, Prussia, Austria and Russia, countries that were his adversaries at this time. Acting quickly and knowing that the Martians are more powerful than anything Earth has ever seen, he sends envoys carrying letters from himself to these nations, proposing a temporary truce and alliance, outlining the Martian threat, leveraging the fear and uncertainty caused by the invasion to underscore the need for unity. During the Napoleonic Wars, the United Kingdom was one of France's most constant enemies, meaning it would have been difficult to form such an alliance, especially because of such a wild concept as alien invaders from Mars. However, Britain likely would have known quite quickly that this was actually happening, and wasn't just a made-up story or a trick, due to the spies that they would have had in France, as well as just such striking news spreading fast. The Martian invasion would present a common enemy that threatens both nations, potentially providing a basis for cooperation. Nevertheless, to convince the British of his sincerity, Napoleon could take immediate actions that demonstrate good faith. This might include withdrawing French troops from contested territories or releasing British prisoners of war. Napoleon had attempted economic warfare against Britain, with his continental system cutting them off. In this scenario, he might have proposed an economic alliance instead, allowing British goods into France and vice versa. This could help both economies withstand the strain of the Martian invasion. Finally, Napoleon would offer assurances of France's peaceful intentions after the Martian menace is dealt with. The two nations might have formed a common defence pact, agreeing to defend each other's territories against the extraterrestrials. This could involve sharing military intelligence, coordinating military strategies, and potentially even fighting side by side on the battlefield. This alliance of all the nations involved is called the Coalition of Earth, which Bing AI came up with that name by the way, and operates under a joint command, with representatives from each nation contributing to strategic decisions. Massive battles would presumably take place as the combined forces of Europe attempt to engage in 19th century warfare against the Martians. Meanwhile, back at the French Alps, Napoleon is personally leading his Grande Armée and has retreated deep into the mountains. Stalked by a handful of tripods, he's managed to draw away from advancing on the capital city. He lures them into the perfect position in a valley where the bottom of mountains meet, before ordering strategically placed cannons to open fire, plummeting projectiles not into the tripods, but into the mountains, creating a thundering echoing throughout this great arena, followed by the rushing sound that gets louder and louder as an avalanche begins. Huge amounts of snow crash down, crushing and burying the massive machines in this pit. There's dead silence for a moment, as the wall of sound finally quietens down, until the men erupt in celebration. However, a shaking begins. Napoleon frowns, instantly knowing that his efforts have been in vain, as tons of snow from the great pile begin to rise up and one of the tripods begins to re-emerge. Now truly understanding just how invincible these machines are, he mutters, "Nothing can touch them, there is nothing we can do." Yes, of course I was gonna put that in. He orders his men to retreat back out of the Alps while attempting to avoid this menace, his army being stalked and stragglers getting picked off by these great metal monsters. During this devastating retreat, he abandons his army, returning home on a sleigh. Despite the valiant efforts of his Grande Armée, the Martians have proven themselves to be too powerful. Napoleon returns to the capital city, finding a dead Paris. Riding his horse through the deserted streets, past the remnants of what was once a bustling metropolis, the once vibrant city is now eerily silent. Its streets empty and buildings reduced to rubble. His beloved city being in ruins is a heartbreaking sight. Just when all hope seems lost, he's then startled as he catches sight of one of the Martian machines in the distance. Wandering in circles as though dazed and confused after an evening at a cabaret, it begins to slow down before eventually coming to a halt. Intrigued and cautious, Napoleon decides to investigate personally, gaining a higher vantage point which reveals a dozen of the Martian machines standing still like giant statues in the middle of the city. He dismounts and approaches a collapsed example, climbing onto it and peering inside. There he sees a Martian creature, lifeless. He's silent for a moment, taking in the sight. Relief washes over him, but it's mixed with a profound sadness for the heavy price humanity and France had to pay. News of the Martians' defeat spreads quickly, and the Coalition of Earth celebrates their unexpected victory. Despite their losses, there's a sense of relief and hope. Humanity has survived. Napoleon leads the effort to rebuild Paris and heal the wounds of war. His leadership during these trying times cements his place as one of history's greatest leaders, building monuments to this event, such as the Arc de Triomphe sur les Martians, and he writes books ensuring his legacy, as he is generally credited with the triumphant outcome of the War of the Worlds.